Stop the FOMO. You don't have to spend more than $1,000 to get an amazing TV. I'm talking about the Hisense U8N. I'm going to show you how the Hisense U8N has all the awesomeness of TVs costing twice as much. Our TV review of the Hisense U8N covers all the essentials of HDR movies, streaming, Dolby Vision, sports, motion processing, including comparisons to one of my favorite giant killers of 2024, the TCL QM8 51G. By the end of this video, you will know exactly whether the Hisense U8N is a good fit for your use case. Plus, we'll offer you TV alternatives that cost slightly more or slightly less. But first, today's sponsor is an essential piece of office gear that I've been using for years now, and I highly encourage you sedentary souls to try out the FlexiSpot Standing Desk. Are you tired of sitting, feeling stiff and unproductive at your desk? Leave that sedentary lifestyle behind and upgrade to the FlexiSpot E7 Plus today and transform your workspace. The ultimate solution for your health and productivity. I've been using this desk for the last few weeks editing my videos, and what a difference standing makes. Easily set the memory with presets to get your preferred height and watch the E7 Plus rise and fall with the touch of the button. And its obstacle sensor stops the desk from rising or falling if it feels there's something in the way. Or you can hit the desk and it'll stop. Unlike earlier standing desks with only 2 legs and 1 motor, the E7 Plus is a rock-solid 4-leg design with 2 motors, which means exceptional stability. Built to handle heavy loads, the E7 can lift me and up to 440 pounds. And best of all, it looks good. I love the stylish bamboo for product shots. Visit flexispot.com and use my promo code in the video description below for amazing discounts. So you want a flagship mini-LED TV like the Sony Bravia 9 or a Samsung QM8 but you promised yourself or a significant other that you would not spend more than $1,000. Good news, the Hisense U8N has dropped in price. It is now selling for just under $1,000, $999 to be exact. So after this price drop, is it worth considering? Quick note before the review starts, all TVs compared in this video have the most recent firmware update as of July 1st, 2024. Alright, let's start with TV audio.
Trying to say that I will get there soon. 30 days I walk down this way, singing my madness to the moon. I met a cat on a tree, and it talked to me about things we don't see. I asked it, how do I know which is the right way to go to get me home? And it said, don't look for a reason, don't look for another way, 'cause anyway it will get you home. You can't get lost if you don't know where you go. And 3,000 miles from home, trying to say that I will get there soon. 30 days I walk down this way, singing my madness to the moon. I met a cat on a tree, and it talked to me about things we don't see. I asked it, how do I know which is the right way to go to get me home? And it said, don't look for a reason, don't look for another way, 'cause anyway we'll get you home. You can't get lost if you don't know where you go. 3,000 miles from home, trying to say that I will get there soon. 30 days I walk down this way, singing my madness to the moon. I met a cat on a tree, and it talked to me about things we don't see. I asked it, how do I know which is the right way to go to get me home? And it said, don't look for a reason, don't look for another way. And it said, don't look for a reason, don't look for another way, 'cause anyway we'll get you.
The Hisense U8N is easily among the best TV audio out there. I'd say just behind the Bravia 9. As you see, it gets loud, not quite as loud as the QM8 in terms of maximum headroom, but it's more balanced, right? The bass is there. It's not as sibilant as the QM851G. So if you're not planning to get a soundbar, the Hisense U8N definitely has the TV audio that I'd recommend. Next up is the best part, comparing image quality using a high quality source, my trusty Kaleidoscape for HDR movies. In these comparisons, none of the TVs are calibrated except for my reference monitor, the Sony 3110. To help you better see the differences, I'll adjust the exposure throughout all these comparisons to show scene brightness and shadow detail. Remember that the Sony 3110 best represents the creator's intent. Let's see how close the Hisense U8N can get, uncalibrated out of the box. U8N is in filmmaker mode, dynamic tone mapping is off, as well as all other enhancements also off. So far so good. I'm definitely happy with how well the U8N is matching up to my reference monitor in terms of skin tones and overall accuracy. But let's have fun next and play with some settings outside of filmmaker mode. For example, changing from filmmaker mode to HDR theater lowers the black levels for better perceived contrast, but the brighter parts of the scene get even brighter, clipping some of that specular detail. Obviously straying away from creator's intent, but this gives you an option for something different. And toggling to IMAX mode makes everything bright, especially the higher end part of the scene, although I see an attempt to preserve shadow detail and black levels. And I personally prefer dynamic tone mapping on, with active contrast set to medium for bright room watching. Otherwise, keeping it off for dark room watching is better. But then if you're in a dark room, you probably want to be in filmmaker mode. The drawback with these other modes is color accuracy. Ugh, look at all that yellow. What happened to it? HDR theater mode, remember? Changing it back? Yep, just like the reference monitor. While IMAX mode gets bright without affecting color as much as HDR theater. So when watching movies, I just reserve IMAX mode for really bright rooms, otherwise stick to filmmaker mode. Next up, we're going to compare the Hisense U8N to the 2024 TCL QM8. And the QM8 appears to be a little brighter than accurate compared to the U8N. And I know what some of you are saying, hold on, increase that QM8 gamma to 2.6 to improve accuracy. Guess what? Gamma is already at 2.6 for darkroom watching. Not a big deal, but out of the box, the U8N has more accurate gamma. So why is the QM8 doing this? For brighter specular highlights, of course. There's no free lunch, my friends, and the QM8 knowingly increased overall brightness to give you that extra punch in that specular highlight in her hat. How well does the U8N render bright specular detail in this scene from Pan? Look at the bright sun and the specular highlights of the clouds in front. The 2024 QM8 has better specular detail. You see the clear outlines of the clouds compared to the U8N. That is excellent tone mapping, similar to the LG G4 and Sony Bravia 9. Going into the settings to enable dynamic tone mapping, it does lower the shadow detail a little to improve perceived contrast and definitely increases the sun's brightness, but you now lose even more specular detail. Some may prefer this look and arguably preserves HDR impact, but it is straying farther away from creators' intent if that's important to you. Speaking of creators' intent, what about the different approach that each TV adopts to render Wonder Woman's skin tone? It appears that the QM8 is a touch richer here and there, while the U8N is more even-handed in color saturation. So who's right? Enter the 3110 reference monitor to answer this question. And the U8N nails skin tone accuracy. And now, the hardest part of our test, dark scene shadow detail that best matches creator's intent, as shown on the 3110 reference monitor. Turning up my exposure, you see that the QM8 has black crushing here and there, while the U8N matches reference a bit better. Let's play with the gamma settings on the QM8 to see if we can't fix this. Currently, at gamma 2.6, it's a bit dark, so let's take it down to 2.4. Although the midtones are definitely brighter, the black crushing hasn't been fixed, while the highlights on her forehead and cheekbones are now too bright. Let's try enabling dynamic tone mapping to detail priority. This at least balances the brightness, but now everything is too bright. This is actually fine in a bright room, but for accurate movie watching in a dark room, the U8N is the more accurate TV. For bright room watching on the U8N, I recommend using IMAX mode to make these scenes a little bit brighter while maintaining shadow detail without black crushing. Next, we stream Netflix via Google Chromecast in HDR. And don't worry, we'll compare Dolby Vision right after this. Let's stop right here. Lower the exposure, and wow, U8N nails the brightness. What if we put it in IMAX mode? Okay, brightens the highlights. Well, brightens a lot. Darkens the shadow detail. How about HDR theater? Brightens only the brightest highlights like the snow on the wall while darkening shadow detail. I'll stick with filmmaker mode for now. Moving on to this next scene and looking through the different exposures, I can safely say both look great. But what if we use the internal app of the Hisense U8N, which means Dolby Vision? So how does Dolby Vision compare to standard HDR10? Not too different in this scene. Let's move on to the next one. Feels like there's less color saturation, less dynamic range, but I guess you could argue that the U8N needs its Dolby Vision calibrated. Or, this is how Dolby Vision should look in this scene? Sadly, without a reference Dolby Vision monitor, we'll never know. But let's play with the different Dolby Vision settings, like Dolby Vision IQ. Okay, it makes the scene brighter for bright room watching. Overall, it's different. At best, maybe this is how Dolby Vision should look. You either like it or you don't. And at worst, the U8N is not doing Dolby Vision the way it should be done, but we'll never know. All right, you twisted my arm. Let's compare the Dolby Vision of both the Hisense U8N and the TCL QM8 51G through a common source to see if they look the same. After making sure both are in Dolby Vision Dark, it appears that the QM8 is definitely brighter and likely needs some kind of calibration. So out of the box, both TVs nearly match the reference monitor with standard HDR, while Dolby Vision is completely different between these two TVs. Playing with the different Dolby Vision modes, ironically, the U8N in Dolby Vision IQ is most similar to the QM8 in Dolby Vision Dark. But I'll stick to regular HDR. Unfortunately, If you are watching exclusively with internal apps on either the QM8 or the U8N, you're stuck with Dolby Vision. You cannot disable it on the TV. Next, we watch sports on YouTube TV. Let's see how well that tennis ball moves on these TVs. I captured this footage in 4K 120, slowed it down, and matched it frame for frame to compare the motion processing and motion resolution of both these TVs. Lastly, off-angle viewing, about 25 degrees off angle. The U8N appears to be a little bit better than the QM8, but you're definitely losing color saturation. And beyond a 30-degree viewing angle, it'll only be worse. Best to get an OLED TV if this bothers you. After all of that, conclusion and final thoughts. How good then is the Hisense U8N? Do I recommend it? Well, for sure. Under $1,000 and likely to be $950 or less by the end of the year, definitely highly recommended. The Hisense U8N is a good TV. I also like that its internal apps like Netflix work as well as the external version. As a matter of fact, Dolby Vision fans, you'll love this. It appears to be pretty accurate, even more so than the 2024 TCL QM8. And so let's just summarize all of its strengths. First, overall brightness is pretty good, right up there with the QM8, arguably slightly behind, but for sports watching, it's fine. Second, speaking of sports, its sports motion resolution is just as good as the QM8. If anything, it's arguably maybe more accurate in terms of skin tones or color accuracy. Not like it's a big deal, but it has to be mentioned, the U8N nails it there. And third, motion processing, excellent overall. Granular control, I love how I could adjust it to my taste. I'd recommend it for either movie watching or sports watching as well. Fourth, its HDR impact is more similar to the Bravia 9 than the QM8. It doesn't have the specular highlights of the QM8 51G, but then its shadow detail is a little bit better, like the Bravia 9. It essentially has similar design objectives as the Bravia 9 in preserving shadow detail rather than hitting absolute specular highlights. Which does take us to specular highlights, where the QM8 51G probably has the best in class specular highlights of any MiniLED TV in 2024. Just behind it are both the Bravia 9 and the U8N. So compromises being what they are. For under $1,000, it's really hard to go wrong with the Hisense U8N given its strengths. But then what about its weaknesses? So let's list them. First, the black bars are slightly raised, right? In return for that good shadow detail. In a dark room with movie scenes that have a black bar, you will notice slightly raised black bars. So if that's an issue for you, best to get an OLED TV, which will have more perfect shadow detail without the black bars at all. Second, tone mapping is definitely behind the QM8 51G, but it's not terrible. However, you need to play with the settings, and if you really want ultimate accuracy, best to spend maybe $600 more for the Samsung S90C, which will preserve HDR impact while nailing the shadow detail accuracy and specular highlights. And last but not least is off-angle viewing, which may be important for some of you with a giant couch. Those sitting on the ends, beyond 25 degrees, you're going to notice a loss of contrast, a loss of color saturation. It's not terrible, but it may be bad enough for you to consider getting an OLED TV instead. This again takes us to something like the LG B3 for about $200 more, currently $1,200. And this takes us to alternative TVs. So if that weakness, right, low luminance, shadow detail with color saturation, off angle, I highly recommend the LG B3 because it addresses all of that. But what do you lose? Ultimate brightness. If you watch a lot of sports, you need that brightness in sports content. Well, get the U8N because the B3 simply is not designed for that level of brightness. Alternatively, rather than going up a few hundred, let's say you want to go down 100, well, you have the TCL QM7 for $100 less. I would consider, because it's very similar to last year's QM8, So if you can wait for Black Friday, check out my pricing targets, right? Looking at the Samsung S90C as my benchmark, $1,500, amazing TV. This represents the minimum flagship price to get into a QD OLED that's bright, satisfying, perfect off angle, great shadow detail, $1,500, right? Let's go down from there. You can't break 1,000. Well, you have the QM8 51G that will be around 1,000 by Black Friday. Then you have the U8N, which I expect to be closer to 900 by Black Friday. The QM7 will be closer to 800 or less. And then the U7N will likely be under $700. This is golden times for TV buyers this year. And although I'm describing all these TVs as budget TVs, the reality is they're going to match the Samsung QN90D and Sony Bravia 7 for half the price, and more often than not, maybe better in some scenes. So let me know in the comments below whether you would consider the Hisense U8N given its strengths, and if not, why not? Until next time, stop the FOMO.